Now, for those of you who are new here, my name is Manuel Tall, and today we're going to be looking at a deep dive into the Steam Deck OLED and looking inside as to why this is one of the best handheld gaming devices and why you might want to consider it as your next purchase. Now, just to provide everyone with some context and some background, the Steam Deck is a mobile PC gaming device. So essentially that means that the games that you have on your Steam library on your PC, you can play on this device pretty much anywhere you are, on the go or at home. Now, starting with the layout of the Steam Deck, it actually is unchanged from the LCD version. As you can tell from the naked eye, you can't really tell the difference between the LCD and OLED versions. However, this is the 7.4-inch updated OLED screen. Other than that, the button layout is identical. So you get the standard A, B, X, Y buttons. You have an analog stick as well as a haptic feedback touchpad. And on the left side, you get another analog stick, a D-pad, and another touchpad. And on the rear, you get programmable triggers, LR on both sides. And of course, you get the standard bumper triggers on the top. Now, the true tale of the OLED version, if you're not looking at the screen, is that the power button on the rear is actually now orange. Other than that, you still get the volume rocker button, still have a headphone jack, and best of all, it is USB-C. Now, a great added bonus from Valve is all Steam Decks, whether it's the LCD or the OLED versions, come with this hard shell carrying case. That's great for traveling abroad or just storing your Steam Deck at home, making sure nothing happens to it. As well, the OLED versions come with a 45-watt USB charger that charges the Steam Deck in about 2 hours. What's also great is you can use your Steam Deck and play video games while plugged into the wall. And guys, if you want to stay on top of all the tech and video reviews around gaming and PCs in general, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I post weekly videos on a regular basis, so hit the notification bell to stay in touch with all the new content that I post. Now I want to talk about the screen, and the screen is probably why you clicked on this video. It is a 7.4-inch OLED screen with 1280 by 800 resolution, but do not let that resolution fool you. While it's not a full 1080p, the contrast on an OLED screen is just absolutely phenomenal. Now, Valve didn't just stop the upgrades with the panel type. The refresh rate on the OLED version is also higher than the standard LCD. You now get 90 Hz of refresh rate. So that means 90 frames per second on games is playable without any screen tearing. Now, what really makes the OLED screen in general just so amazing relative to the LCD is the color contrast, and specifically the darker colors compared to the brighter colors. On an LCD screen, sometimes you'll notice even the blacks tend to wash out, or you can see light seeping in, where with an OLED display, the blacks are as black as you can possibly get with a very high contrast ratio, about 1,000,000 to 1 relative to the other colors. So that means when you're playing games with vibrant colors, you can truly appreciate the color gamut on the OLED screen relative to an LCD version of it. Now, Valve did make the OLED version, but there are two variants of it depending on what the storage option you purchase. Now, I have the 512GB version. This does not come with an anti-glare screen, so you can even notice that even with my lighting setup, you can tell there is glare. You have to upgrade to the 1TB version if you want that anti-glare. And one of the regrets I do have is I should have jumped on it, not just for the higher storage, but the anti-glare really comes in clutch when you're in direct sunlight. Not that that's an issue, but when you are playing and you want to truly appreciate the colors and the contrast of an OLED screen, you want to make sure that glare doesn't impede on that. So remember when I said at the beginning of the video, don't let Valve fool you with the OLED version. The reason why I'm saying that is they didn't just make a better screen on the Steam Deck, they also improved the internals. Now, this Steam Deck comes equipped with the 6nm APU, which is smaller than the 7nm. Now, in layman's terms, while it's the same chip, a smaller chip means it's more efficient. That means it takes up less power. And speaking of power, you can really push the power on this because the battery life has also been extended on the Steam Deck OLED. So a better battery life and a more efficient processor means a longer and better experience when you're gaming. The battery is actually 20% larger physically, with now has 50 watt hours as opposed to the 40 watt hours in the LCD version. Now, on top of the APU and battery changes, there's also better Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. This now has Bluetooth 6.0 as well as Wi-Fi 5.3. And the best thing about this is that all versions, the 512GB as well as the 1TB, have NVMe SSDs. These are the fastest class of SSDs that you can get. For the previous LCD versions, you had to go to the highest tier in order to get NVMe. Other than that, you would get the standard lower rate SSD speeds on the 256 and 64GB versions. So we talked about the screen, we talked about the internals. now it's time to talk about the gaming. And right off the top, the gaming on the Steam Deck OLED has been so consistent and so good. Now, just for comparison's sake, I purchased an ROG Ally. I actually made a video review of it here. Now, the Asus is more powerful on paper and in spec and does have a higher resolution screen. That being said, even at 1280 by 800 resolution on the Steam Deck OLED, the games look so good because of that OLED panel. With the 90 Hz refresh rate paired with the HDR display at 1000 nits of brightness, the gaming is just so fluid and it just feels so good. Now, jumping into the specific benchmarks, I played Cyberpunk as well as F123. Now, Cyberpunk is a game that's very popular and was actually riddled with a lot of issues at launch, but since then they've released the 2.1 patch, and that patch translates very well to the Steam Deck. Now, depending on the settings that you have your Steam Deck on, I like to set mine between 10 to 15 watts of draw power. I can get up to 50 FPS on medium settings at the maximum resolution and have no issues whatsoever. And I can get between 2.5 hours to 3.5 hours of battery life, which is actually very good. And I haven't had to worry about overheating once because the internal cooling is just so good on this device. Now, some games aren't as demanding. For example, F123, if I jack up the settings even to high while keeping it at maximum resolution and around 10 to 12 watts of total draw power, I can get upwards between 60 and 80 frames per second and still get between 3 to 4 hours of battery life. Now, I do want to really touch on battery life in gaming. A good rule of thumb is the higher total draw power, the lower your battery life, but the higher the performance. It's an inverse relationship. And if you want to conserve battery life, you want to bring down that total draw power around 10 to maybe 8, and you'll probably extend your battery life by a couple of hours, but you will take a performance hit. Now, the good news is for older games and indie games, you can really bring down the watts and really preserve your battery life. Now, Steam says that you can get up to 12 hours of battery life. That I find a very stretched exaggeration. I've been able to stretch it out to 6.5, around 7 hours, but that was me playing very conservatively and also at a very low brightness level. Realistically, depending on the games, if you're playing a mixed bag, you're looking at between 2.5 to 4.5 hours, which is actually very good if you're on a commute or if you're on a short haul flight, and it will pass the time, and it's one of the best things to do, being able to pair PC games on the go. Now, one thing I want to touch on once again is compared to the Asus ROG Ally, the Steam Deck stays cool. I can hold it comfortably without having my hands burn. The Asus ROG Ally, on the other hand, you have people that are creating third-party unofficial mods just to keep it cool. So if you want to go for the maximum performance with the Asus ROG Ally, be my guest, but you are gonna take a hit when it comes to cooling. Like I said, Valve did a phenomenal job with the internals on this one. Now, outside of gaming, this is a pretty versatile device. Remember when I said that this is a PC handheld gaming device? I want to touch on the PC aspect of it. You can actually go into desktop mode and take advantage of the Linux operating system. You use the trackpads as the mice, and you can use the standard keyboards to work around on the Steam Deck. So pretty much the way you'd be able to run Linux on a PC, you can run Linux on the Steam Deck by installing any application that you like. Personally, I'm a Windows user. I truly have not appreciated how well Linux is and all the possibilities, but I certainly will be exploring them. And the number one opportunity to explore is emulation. I'm going to be doing an entire separate video of why the Steam Deck is the perfect emulation device. I'll be doing emulation on PS2, Xbox, GameCube, as well as Xbox 360 games, and I'll be testing it to the limits. But hint, a lot of YouTubers have made videos and they said that the emulation is actually great. So if you really like playing around and installing third-party applications, then the Steam Deck OLED is definitely for you. Now, I've said some pretty great things about the Steam Deck OLED, but part of my channel is that I try to keep the reviews as honest as possible, and I want to say that this is not a completely perfect device, and I want to touch on a few subject matter. Number one is third-party launcher. So like I mentioned, this is a Steam OS device, so this means it will play your Steam games on your Steam library. However, if you're looking at third-party launchers like Ubisoft and Rockstar, you really have to go out of your way and install third-party applications through desktop mode in order to make those games work, and they don't always work. My biggest gripe with this device actually is the inability for it to install Game Pass. Now, I have Game Pass for my Xbox as well as PC. However, I just can't seem to get it working on the Steam Deck OLED. There might be a version, and this be my own ignorance, but it's very difficult to install third-party applications. and third-party games on this Steam Deck OLED. Now, issue number 2 is the headphone jack. So if you are using a wired headphone connection, there have been reports and issues with buzzing and high frequency in the headphones when listening to them. Now, I haven't had that issue, but there are a number of people who have experienced this, and I'm just giving you a heads up that if you do intend using headphones, this is something that you might come across. I'm not sure if Valve has patched this or if this is a hardware issue, but it's just something to look out for. Now, my other gripe is actually a personal preference, and that related to the rear programmable buttons. Now, for some reason, I just don't find pressing these buttons comfortable. I don't get that feedback that you do relative to the other buttons. The length of stroke, like how far they travel in, is very limited, and you have to press them quite hard relative to the other buttons to really actuate them. Another thing is their placement seems to be a bit lower. I'm used to an Asus ROG Ally as well as a gaming wheel, so when you're using to throttle up and down, I would find myself pressing the buttons higher. These seem to be a bit lower, but take this with a grain of salt. This is probably my own personal preference. You might end up loving the button placement for the Steam Deck. All right, now for the main question, should you buy the Steam Deck OLED? And I would say it depends. Now, if you have an extensive Steam library, then the Steam Deck OLED is a no-brainer. Now, my recommendation is that you go with the 1TB version. It's around $70 more expensive than the 512GB, but you do get a better anti-glare screen. But even if you go with the 512GB, it's still a very good purchase. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the beginning, but this comes with a micro SD slot, so you do have expandable storage when you need it. Now, there are other alternatives like the Asus ROG Ally, as well as the MSI Claw that was just released. This really comes down to personal preference. I would say that the Asus ROG Ally and MSI sort of have an advantage when it comes to installing third-party applications, where you can also install Steam on it and run Steam games, as well as other launchers like Ubisoft, EA, as well as Rockstar. But just the way that Valve integrated the software and hardware and having no issues and no crashes, with my personal experience, I would say the reliability of the Steam Deck is probably one of the best, and probably the best among all handheld gaming devices. The other alternative is you don't purchase it at all, you save your money, or you go with the Nintendo Switch or a console-specific version. At the end of the day, it really comes down to your preference and whether or not you want a game on the go. I like gaming in front of a PC, but I also like gaming at my dining table, on my sofa, in a car, or waiting in a room at my doctor's office if I have to. Just having this on the go is very, very convenient. So if you guys liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you find videos like this helpful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I did say that I will be posting more Steam Deck content like emulation and other performance benchmarks, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace.